Welcome to the Focal Insights Podcast Founder Hour edition, hosted by co-founder Joe Pollock. Joe has been in the e-commerce industry for over 25 years. He grew and bootstrapped his own startup to a successful exit. Founder Hour episodes go behind the scenes to learn how some of the best e-commerce brands were founded, grown, and operated straight from the founders themselves. Founder Hour is brought to you by Focal Software, a new generation ERP and operation suite for e-commerce brands and third-party marketplace sellers. Focal was built with SMB brands and marketplace sellers in mind to help them grow profitably. Now let's welcome our host, Joe Pollock.
Hello and welcome to the Focal E-commerce Insights podcast, where we chat with e-commerce entrepreneurs about business, selling online, and how to overcome challenges for success. Joining us today is Camille Barreto, who is the CEO of We Are Me Cosmetics, which she started in 2021. She has a Bachelor of Arts degree from Dartmouth College and an MBA from Columbia Business School. We Are Me Cosmetics has a powerful mission to transform self-consciousness into self-confidence. A 6-time award-winning leader in luxury cosmetics, Camille has a previous life in finance prior to switching to cosmetics and is passionate about elevating careers and enjoys mentoring other professionals across various business sectors. Camille, welcome to the podcast.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. All right. Well, we always start these by getting a little bit of background to bring everyone up to current, because everyone that owns their own business, started their own business, has a similar motivations, but a totally different story in most cases. So why don't you give us how you got into this, and maybe touching on your previous life in finance as well. What motivated you to set out on your own?
Sure thing. So this actually, We Are Me Cosmetics, as you heard, is a different sector than the one I had worked in before. So how did I end up here is a little bit of a circuitous route, but it's interesting. It was actually largely due, and you hear this a lot with more successful brand founders, that it comes out of a personal necessity, not because celebrity backed something, not that those things can't be successful, but a personal need. And so for me, I had, in parallel to my career in finance and prior to that in tech, I'm almost 50 years old now, just to give some context of timeframes. In my early 20s, I started having hair loss, experiencing a permanent genetic condition called androgenetic alopecia. So as I marched through my career, and I was very happy, I always had this lingering concern about the way I looked. And it's not a matter of vanity, it's just a matter of self-confidence and self-consciousness. And it's okay to be self-conscious, right? And so we have to kind of give ourselves a little grace for that. But I didn't want to have to use the tools that were existing in the marketplace, which were essentially none for this particular purpose. We have all been jerry-rigging eyeshadows and root covers, little tiny ones, or spray cans, to be able to help us conceal our hair loss. But at the end of the day, none of them really performed properly, not because they aren't excellent products in their own right, but because this is simply not what they were designed for. So I set off on a path to identify the key characteristics of a solution set that would, successfully address this need. And at the same time, make sure that there was a market fit, that it wasn't just a this is about me product, but it's might be that the seed started with me, but there is a huge forest the size of the Amazon or bigger out there in terms of marketability and addressable market. So both things I did in parallel. And after deciding to launch the brand, following a review, it's a very large market. 50% of women, over 70% of men experience hair loss at some point. Sometimes it's temporary, sometimes it's permanent. It presents differently. So I knew the addressable market was huge. Nobody was talking about it back then, so it made it a little bit more difficult. There was no data other than some little data points here and there. But I think analogy in this particular instance did serve well, because it was 30 years of analogies of people I'd talked to across all gambits of life. So the addressable market was definitely compelling. And then I had to learn about the industry in order to launch this particular product successfully, which I'm very fortunate to say that we were able to do so. So that's essentially how I got to this point. of launching the company, and we're now, a couple of years in, learned a lot of lessons along the way, both about the industry, e-commerce, and about myself. And it's always a joy to be able to share that experience with everyone out there, because for me, for example, when I was looking to learn about podcasts and the industry, cosmetics, and how the distribution works and everything that was involved with launching a successful DTC brand, it really whittled down to, believe it or not, listening to 1,000 podcasts. And there is all this information out there, and each one you could pick up a new little nugget from. So hopefully I'm able to share some of those little nuggets, even if it's just one, with your audience today.
Yes, absolutely. And you just shared a few there. Let's hit on these. So everybody that starts a business, they're solving a problem, right? So you had a problem for yourself that you wanted to solve, and then you also knew, hey, if I have this problem, then a lot of people have it. And when you talk about a total addressable market, we're just talking about human beings, and there's a lot of those, so you've got a pretty big market. So there's those two, and then there's also, I think, something you touched on lightly and then reaffirmed with you using podcasts for education, and that's a little bit about what we're doing here. But you said when you started, nobody was talking about it. So was there a component of education built into your go-to-market strategy, or how do you when nobody's talking, how do you start a conversation with the world, essentially?
That's a very good point. So how did we get people talking about this? What I did was I transferred and kind of latched onto, or leveraged, if you will, the messaging from our would-be quote unquote competitors, the things I had been using for decades. And you have to do it in a delicate manner, but it's okay to be forceful and say, hey, this isn't great at this. It's great at what it does. It's not great at this. And what do we do differently? So that, but also whittle that message very, very clearly in just a few seconds, that you can get people on social media, for example, or in an online ad if you use that particular platform. So in that aspect, I really did use my experience of being able to share those comparisons, because I knew anybody out there in the void, if you will, even if they had never talked about it or if they've never looked for solutions per se, it was still in the back of their mind in terms of our audience. And so when you could find a way to connect with them on their pain points, which is what we did, I just said, hey, I'm one of you. I get you. Two, I'm not here to sell you snake oil to grow your hair. We'll leave that to the medical professionals. I think there's too much of that in this industry. I'll be very blunt. And three, here's why this is really good and you're going to love it. And four, if you don't, it's okay. We can take it back. We stand by what we're saying. This isn't just fluff, right? And that message, for better or for worse, came across very, very well, which is great. We also wanted to do it, however, while flying under the radar and not alarming our competitors, who could easily, due to their significantly larger resources, and by significantly, I'm talking lots of zeros at the end, able to replicate and launch if they wanted to. So we really focused on creating that sense of genuine community. Is kind of overused. I think hair loss, yes, there's a big community, but still a lot of people choose to keep that private, and we always have to respect that journey. But at least find a way to create, even if it's not a large community that speaks vocally out in the world, although they're starting to, which is great, at least that resonates with a large community. And they all understood that what we were saying and what we were selling actually hits those pain points and addresses their biggest concerns along the way that they've had with other things that they've tried, or if they haven't tried, why they haven't tried it.
Yeah, and you mentioned earlier that yourself, you were using different products and repurposing them to solve a different problem. And it sounds like you made an assumption that there was a lot of that going on, and that came true, or was it an assumption? Did you have any way of knowing that that's happening, or is it just impossible that it's not because there's no specific solutions for the specific problem?
Pretty much the latter. I'll be honest. And also, whenever I spoke to hairstylists, which is where I went for a lot of information, because I ran a survey with about 1,000 participants, independent of our brand, pre-launch, to find out people who are experiencing mild or moderately thinning hair, or have fine hair that just kind of looks limp and they want to make it look thicker. Where have they been going for information? And 70% of them, and if you look at a bar graph, that 70% stands alone as a very tall tower. 70% of them said their hairstylist was their first person. So I knew I had to go talk to the hairstylist and say, look, I know what I've been doing. Am I nuts? Is everybody else doing this? They said everybody is doing it. And then with the onset of social media, and this I love, and the journey hand in hand has been a place of comfort where a lot of folks have turned to find solutions because of this very common consideration or situation that folks have. And so you could actually see it come to fruition and come to life in terms of virality online. You could see a lot of videos with the eyeshadow hack that are viral. So people are looking for it, people are forwarding it, people are watching it. So the really great thing about social media is it gives you a pretty quick, it's not perfect, but a pretty quick feedback loop as to if your messaging is on point, if you've got the right audience, if your product's got a good fit, or if your product doesn't, because it's just not doing anything specifically better, you'll know very quickly. So we really focused on that and was seeing where people were going for information, as well as understanding how to get the quickest feedback, because this is a new product category that doesn't exist. When you go to Sephora.com or in a Sephora store, there's no section for this, right? Whereas there really should be.
Yeah. So you made a pretty big assumption based on what you see in the world, but then you did go out and you got somewhat scientific about it by surveys and interviews, it sounds like, with hairstylists and social media questioning. So were you already down the path at that point, or were you doing research to confirm that you're on the right path?
The latter, definitely. I was doing research to confirm I'm on the right path, because the product development cycle for proper custom developed and properly safety tested, which is a big sticky point in this industry because not everybody does it. Unfortunately, it is what it is. But that takes a very long time. It takes 18 months to 2 years to launch a new product. If you're really doing everything in terms of not private labeling, not just throwing a sticker on, not doing the proper safety testing, or not doing above and beyond in terms of the bare minimum. We always go above and beyond with our safety testing. So that was something we did in parallel. And thankfully it did confirm, but I was pretty confident, because I'd been walking this journey for so long, that I was pretty confident it would. And it was really nice to see like a perfect puzzle kind of slotted in that last piece that said, whew, okay, I'm not going to do this without the last puzzle piece.
Yeah, so the lesson there is because that's a big investment. Like you said, time, and of course time is an investment because you're doing things, and I'm sure that there was some money involved. So before you do all that, before you set down, racing down that road, do some homework to make sure this is
definitely, but we definitely waited. Like, we didn't put in POs to manufacture the products until we had that confirmed. That's where the big outflow of cash goes in the very beginning. Yes, the other pieces do have some meaningful outflow, but not to the extent that does. That's really where you're going to have the crux of your cogs in this type of business before you launch and start marketing.
Yeah, well, let's talk a little bit about that. So we talked about some challenges that you had early on just to get started. Then once you get started, what did you come across as far as challenges that you were able to overcome, or that you didn't see coming and was able to overcome them? There's always surprises, right?
Yes. So I did not appreciate how quickly the DTC market was growing and the impact that would have especially with the pandemic happening right after, right around or right before we launched. We didn't really know the long-term impacts of those things. And we've seen that some impacts were short-term, but many, in terms of the growth of this market, are just, it's explosive. It's huge. And so I didn't appreciate the amount of resources in terms of human and financial capital that would be required, not to launch. Everybody can launch, right? You can just set up your own website and you say, yay, I launched a brand. But to actually be cash flow positive and be making money, because I'm a big proponent of cash is king. If you don't have cash, you are at somebody else's mercy, and that is never a good position you want to be in, ever. Whether you're negotiating fundraising or with supply chain or figuring out what to do for next steps for your business, it's just basically strapping you into the chair you're in. You can't do anything. So that was a key piece for me that I had to learn. Fortunately, I figured it out pretty fast, and so I was able to make some adjustments to my plans, which is why we are cash flow positive. We have been since month 13, and I haven't put a penny back into the business since then. I still don't draw salary, but that's okay. It's a labor of love, so you got to take some time to do that. So that was a big piece of it. And then the precision of messaging that's required and how to figure out the right brand ambassadors to bring on board, either formally as a business partner or informally in terms of gifting or seeding products to people to create buzz, if you will. So because I'd never worked in DTC marketing, I'd only worked in B2B type of marketing if I had ever done marketing, or in long-term relationships, such as in private banking, where it's a very different conversation than a fleeting moment on social media or your brand being mentioned somewhere. So we knew we had to really be precise with our marketing. So that took us a little while to figure out how to push the envelope in terms of why this is better without being obnoxious. Obnoxious is really not the style that I wanted us to bring to the table. Some brands do, and it works great. And if you've got enough to back it up, there's nothing wrong with that. I'm all about confidence, but that's not what I wanted to do. So I really, because I knew our audience wasn't going to respond to, oh, all this is terrible. They're not interested. They just want a solution. They don't want to know why what they're doing isn't right. You know, they already know because it's not working for them. So that was a really interesting piece that I learned through the help of a lot of feedback from people, not my friends, not my loved ones, people who were kind of wish-washy borderline. And I know they would never care if my feelings were hurt. Those are the people I went to. And I went over and over and over. And I just kept on saying the message. And when people said, yes to this, no this, yes this, no this, or beef this up, then it really allowed us to resonate with everybody in our audience because that message had been so precise. And in terms of selecting the right brand ambassadors, that we decided for us a two-prong approach would work really well, which was the use of a partner in a financial relationship. So there we took on a partner. Her name is Sheena Shea. She's an original cast member of Vanderpump Rules. Any Bravo people out there will know exactly who she is. And she had shared publicly about her journey with hair loss in People magazine and other places, literally like a year or two prior. So fortunately, they didn't know if they were going to get picked up for the next season. This was 1.5 seasons ago, well, over a season ago. And so I was able to, within the scope of my resources, afford to have her. And she loves the product. She still talks about it. She would still post about it beyond the scope. But we also knew that's not where everybody goes. Yes, a lot of people, especially who are into cosmetics, there's big overlap in the Bravo celebrity kind of world in their areas of interest. But we also knew we needed to kind of be down on the ground and create a buzz. But I don't have the financial resources as a company to be spending millions and millions and millions in online advertising or, spreading myself across a whole bunch of platforms in terms of social media with the hope, finger crossed, that you're going to go viral. And even if you do go viral, that doesn't translate into sales right away. It really doesn't. You have to repeat. So I knew we needed ambassadors that were on the ground. But I was like, how do I find these people? People don't usually want to talk about this. And I can't work with companies that require, whatever amount as a setup fee. They're, partners that are designed and platforms that are designed for large corporations or very large independently owned brands. And I just started looking around saying, where are the other people who are trying to do that, but they're also small like me? And I came across two groups that have worked beautifully for us. There's a group called Tailory, Tailorie, and another group called Hummingbirds, which I thought the name was brilliant when I heard it, who are small. They're people just like you and me. Some are some larger creators, but the vast majority are just regular people who happen to love sharing beauty or who happen to share about their experience with hair loss or whatever it is that overlaps with what we do. And you actually send out a brief and they select if they want to receive your product for free. You have no obligation to do anything other than post, but you can post if it's bad. You got to take that risk, right? So you have to be confident if you're going to give people the free reins. And so they have all been posting, and that's the little buzz, just like the hummingbirds that we've been using. And we found that's been very effective because I can't play against huge brands that are owned by L'Oreal or Estee Lauder or Shiseido to try to win online in a very crowded space. So I didn't appreciate how crowded it would be, but there's still a way if you're resourceful and scrappy, and again, stay within your means, because otherwise you will end up with a noose around your neck, and that is not a good place to be. I like to sleep calmly at night, as much as an entrepreneur can. And that's where we landed for us. It's not to say that's for everybody, but I think in the DTC space, it's probably a reasonably replicable model to use. So I like to share those tools because not everybody's familiar with them.
Yeah, and when you talk about influencers or brand ambassadors, you got sounds very high profile, and then just regular people so that you can cover that range of maybe one or the other will resonate with different
Right.
people. And yeah, that's great. You also mentioned COVID, and I think when you said some things came back to normal or the way they used to be, some didn't. We definitely know that a lot of behaviors, shopping and purchasing behaviors have changed because of it. So let's get into a little bit what your strategy was. Were you always going to be direct to customer? It sounds like maybe not when you started with stylists or salons. And then let's get into what tools you use to get that going.
Sure. Sure. So we did purposefully launch DTC exclusively. I said, if I'm going to bring a new product to market, essentially create a new product category. Like I said, you go to these websites and there's no subcategory for this. I knew we had to bring data. That's just what it is. Because otherwise, nobody's going to just believe in your story because you tell them how fabulous it is. That's great. And sure, that might work, but that's not how I would run a business with hopes and dreams in that respect. So I knew we just needed hard data. So we launched DTC first because I needed to understand repeat customer rates. Was our fill size appropriate? Was it too big? Was it too small? Was our price point right? Where were they buying? Where were they hearing about us? And so it gave us a good idea about that. And after that, my intention had been originally, and this is what changed for me, my intention had been originally to start looking at retailers, focusing on smaller independently owned retailers. There are a number of them out there, but I quickly changed that because many of them are struggling tremendously against the big box retailers. And it's no longer the reality that those retailers help you succeed. They can, and they absolutely want to do everything they can to do so. However, the onus is on you as a brand to bring the demand to them. So you are basically still going to be marketing against all these huge brands, even if you're in the retailer. They expect you to spend lots of marketing dollars with them. And I'm not talking tens of thousands. We got to add more zeros. So these are big numbers. So I very quickly said, nope. That just to me seems like a death march for a brand like me. I didn't want to take external funding in. I like control over things. And I like to keep it as small as it needs to be effective, but be able to grow. And so, it's small. We can, but we have lots of room for growth, but in a way that is profitable. I'm all about cash flow profits. Not that that's the sole reason we're here, but if you don't have that, you can't spread your message and continue to help bring joy and confidence to people if that's what your messaging is and what you're doing eventually. So that was definitely a pivot for us. And then we are now launching into salons and hairstylists for that fact I told you about, this, 70% of respondents had said that's where they get their information. And then we also knew that friends and family would have a big impact, which is why we dedicate more resources to gifting free products, seeding products into people's hands. Because as most folks know, the COGS in this space are much lower than your retail value because there's a huge margin that's taken for distributors and marketing. So you have room to play if you're not using distributors or doing a ton of online marketing, which we chose not to after our first year. And from that, I have the resources to be able to gift, because that's really at the end of the day what gets people to understand what we do. So that's where we focused. We decided to stay DTC, because many people, they don't go, if you say, hey, if you go to somebody at Sephora, does somebody ever come up to you and say, hey, where are your products to conceal my hair loss? I'm really concerned about it. That is not a conversation most people are comfortable having yet with a third party that they don't know. Hopefully that will change. Just like you would ask about your skin or your, eyelashes or whatever. So that's really where we ended up, was landing on DTC, focusing on salons and hairstylists, independent hairstylists, focusing on sets in Hollywood, even though there was a pause there for a while. For us, that is a great market. Everybody on sets fills in their hair with something, and they've all been using the things I'd mentioned before: cans with spray, things that are matte, things that were just not designed for this. And so once it's gotten into professional stylist hands who work on sets, that's a big community for us as well, which has been fantastic. And then the last piece was growing through word of mouth. It's not a distribution channel, but I consider it a big marketing channel for us, instead of going online directly through ads, because I think a lot of people are sort of tired, a little ad fatigue at this point, or email marketing fatigue. So we don't do a lot of email marketing yet. So those hummingbirds and tailory folks and other partners have been a great distribution for us.
Yeah, yeah. And you touched on something that's very big early on in a company, and that's just brand awareness. So making people aware that you exist. And there's a couple ways to do that. In the direct to consumer market, one of the strategies is to get out onto these platforms or marketplaces that have a social component to them in the way of reviews, and then just start building that as well. Have you done much of that? Are you on a lot of different marketplaces that have those components, or are you mostly the website?
Mostly the website. That being said, we get invited on a fair number of podcasts, which is great because it's kind of a different product, different message, which is nice. Gives the folks a new perspective on truly launching a new type of product in the space, as opposed to just another iteration or variation of one. But definitely there. And so for us, a big part of this moving forward in terms of platforms, again, goes back to your scope of resources that you have, right? First of all, it's a very disaggregated supply chain before you even launch. And then once you launch, it's a very disaggregated social media or marketing supply chain, if you will, of sorts, or funnel, if you want to call it that. And so as soon as I realized the scope that was of resources required, financial, human capital, et cetera, I knew that if we tried to tackle all these platforms at once, we were just going to fall flat on our faces, like that melting face emoji. And I didn't want that to be us. So I said, okay, let's be intentional. First, we're going to start on, Instagram and Facebook. A lot of our user community is older, so Facebook is still one of their key platforms. So we post there quite a bit. Our shop is where there's kind of crossover between generations, if you will, on Instagram. And then on TikTok is typically, not exclusively, where it tends to skew quite a bit younger. So we have tackled the first two. We've started playing in TikTok. I was waiting to see what happens with TikTok before I started throwing resources at it. But it was really, for me, is taking a bite that you could chew and not, and be able to swallow and move forward and not have to choke on it. And I think if folks try to be everywhere to everyone all at once, again, if you're not a behemoth of a brand with unlimited resources, you're not going to do very well. So we have definitely tried to reach our consumers first and foremost where they have told us they are, or where they seek this information. So that's going to depend brand to brand. And we decided to tackle one or two platforms at a time. So we haven't launched on Amazon ourselves yet. We are on TikTok, and yes, we're set up on TikTok shops and all those things. That's the easy part. But to actually be able to make that a viable business strategy, you have to know how to put resources into that. So we're going to figure that out next, one thing at a time. I'm still waiting to see what happens with TikTok first. That's why we were holding off on that.
Yeah, and you touched on that too. Something like TikTok or Amazon as an example. I think that some good advice to people is to be in multiple places, so that you don't have one single source that you have most control over, but you don't have ultimate control over those. So TikTok, went down for 10 minutes. I think everybody's okay at this point on that particular resource.
Yes. Agreed.
Okay, so let's move to the future. So we're currently at about $6 trillion a year is spent online, and that's going to go to about 8 trillion. 20% of all purchases are online, which is a pretty massive amount, all
Hmm.
retail purchases. Where do you think we're going here, or what are your plans for the future? It sounds like maybe get on some new marketplaces, expand, and continue to do what you're doing, because if it's working, keep the ball rolling.
Definitely. So what we've done is seen, kind of observed now post COVID and a little bit of post, industry shakeout of smaller retailers. We kind of have a sense of who might stand at the end of the day. So what I've done is say, okay, who can I use and who could definitely benefit from me? It's got to be a mutual win-win. This isn't all about what the brand wants. It's got to be something that's useful for the retailer, obviously, but that's accessible and that makes things easy for smaller brands. So we found a tremendous amount of success that we really enjoy working with a brand called Flip. I don't know if you're familiar with that app. It's a large marketplace that's launched before TikTok Shops did. And I think
Mhm.
it's got a couple hundred million in funding. So, or at least 100, I think. So they're a pretty robust platform. And there it's very easy because everything that we look for is always drop shipping. Basically, which small retailers want to share our message because they're trying to grow too. So if they only go to the big people, nothing differentiates them from all the other retailers. And then it's just duplicitous. And that's when we see many of these retailers aren't making it because they're all selling the same brands, right? And the same products. So where are the ones where we could easily drop ship? So for them to throw us into their platform isn't resource intensive for them. It's not a big financial risk for them. And it allows us both to see, hey, does this work or not? So Flip has been great for us. 40 boxes. I know if anybody out there watches Good Morning America, Tori Johnson's really known for her deals and steals. So she's got an online retailer called 40 Boxes. They heard about us. They talk about us all the time. Shop Tam Fam. Those sort of different areas that are still very successful and still reach a great audience because we know a lot of our audience is still watching TV, cable type of TV, even if they're streaming it, kind of your traditional channels. And then in terms of next steps, to continue to find those smaller places that where we can replicate that success without either party having to take on a huge amount of risk. And that's really where we're focusing. We are just starting with a new distributor who is going to be focusing exclusively on salons. And we're just going to start market by market. So they're located in Austin, Texas, because we're in Houston, and there's a lot of arts going on in Austin. In contrast to the economy here in Houston, which is a little bit different. And that person is going to be, and that team are going to be going to salons locally and just slowly, boots on the ground, old school grassroots, because I'm much more interested in longevity of the brand, not just in terms of financially successful brands need some longevity. If you're going to peter out because what you do or the way you run your business is quite fleeting, you're going to, people are fickle and you're going to be forgotten very quickly. So for me, longevity is very important. And I think when you grow the good old fashioned way, which is, and it's not the only way, there are plenty of ways to do it. But when you have the resources we do and the type of SKU collection we do, which isn't huge, we don't have 80,000 SKUs, nor will we launch new SKUs unless there's a need for it, which is a big part of our strategy. Which is also why I didn't want to take outside funding because then you have pressure that you have to do things you may not want to do. So for me, that was a very big part in terms of our growth strategy is focusing on how things had been done for many decades before, adapting to the platforms and technology and ways to connect with the consumer that are of today and tomorrow. You can only do so much forecasting. Things change so quickly on a dime. You don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. So you can't, anticipate too much what's going to happen, especially in terms of technology platforms for spreading your marketing message. But that's really the way we're doing it, is just slow and steady. I'm in no rush. And the second reason for me that's really important in terms of viability of the business is that I need to keep this a going concern, not because, if it were to shut down, if I chose one day, okay, this isn't for me or whatever, and I chose to walk away, that only impacts me, I would think, right? But no, for us, we have so many repeat customers. And if you look at our reviews, which has also been a big part of our growth strategy, is real reviews. We don't pay for reviews. We never ask people for reviews. What we ask them, we never ask them as a condition of receiving something. So you see for a small brand our size, having almost over 300 reviews on our website between different products is great. So, that shows that people really love the product. And I know if I don't keep this viable, there are a lot of people whose lives are going to be impacted. And I don't want to do that. I feel an obligation out of care and concern for the community that I'm a part of, who depend on this to go into a boardroom and feel really good about themselves. Because something as simple as your hair can make a big difference in how you feel about yourself. And I've been, not to make this a Debbie Downer thing, but it's okay to recognize and acknowledge things make you self-conscious, right? A lot of marketing doesn't like to use that type of terminology. We just said, forget it. We're going to say it because it's what it is. Let's just call things as they are. And so we knew that, for me, that self-consciousness that I know people have in the community, I feel a responsibility to them. If I've set them on this path, I owe it to them to be able to keep this in their hands as long as they need it. So we'll be around for a long time, God willing.
Sounds like you've got a lot of customers that are relying on you to keep the product coming.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a good thing to have, but it is a responsibility. Okay, as we get to the end of the podcast here today, let's go back to the start of the whole thing and talk a little bit about anybody that's thinking of going into their own business, whether it's e-commerce or not. But since you're e-commerce and we're e-commerce, what are your tips for anybody that's maybe in a 9-to-5 or dabbling in e-commerce and thinking of making that leap to start their own business? Any tips that you would have for anyone?
Sure. In the beginning, if you don't have subject matter expertise in something, seek it out. And there's very many ways to do it. You could pay for it. If you have the resources, that can be sometimes a quick and easy way. Some don't require too much. So, you can do it, and that's the most efficient way. But if you don't have the resources, or the resources you would need access to are very expensive, you just have to be scrappy and find creative ways to get that information. So for me, for example, the supply chain in beauty, in the whole cosmetic space, whether it's makeup or skincare, is extremely secretive because people see that as a key part of their differentiating and competitive advantage. So good luck trying to find who the chemists are, where these things are manufactured. Nobody's going to want to tell you. So I said, okay, well, there's nobody I can pay to tell me that, or maybe there are, but they're going to charge me a lot. Their customers are probably in the beauty sector as it is. They're consultants in the space. So I don't know how much they're going to want to help small brands to find a competitive advantage against existing clients. Or you can go the circuitous way. Be a nice person, go to lots of networking events, trade shows. Even though if I don't need to be at a trade show, I still go, set up a booth. People see you because all of the industry experts are going to be there. Even in a huge industry like the cosmetics and wellness space, everybody who works in it knows each other, especially the people who matter, the people who have all that information. And so the more you can just befriend people actually really want to help you. And you just have to ask the questions. So that to me was the very first piece, is make sure you have all the information you need and the resources you need by asking, what do I need and where are they?
So be scrappy, become an expert, become an authority.
Yeah. Then the second is rely on the resources you can bring to the table as much as you can without having the ego to not know when to let go and to outsource or delegate to somebody else. Because again, the lower your cost base as you're going into new markets, different challenges, things are changing all the time. You've got to be able to adapt very quickly. And if you don't have cash, you don't have options. And that's a really difficult position to be in. So that's a big piece for me is, it's not hard. You can go on Shopify and I hired an external company because I didn't know how to do branding and visual identity, and I hadn't done any of those things. So that I hired, and then we got the Shopify set up. But now we've brought a lot of stuff in-house because we figured out how to do it, and it's not difficult. It's only as complicated as you make it. Figure out your key apps for your tech stack. If you're going to be DTC, like you're mentioning, we're going to focus on. What are the key drivers that are going to have people want to purchase your products? Review. For us, we knew it was transparency. Okay, perfect. Access in a private manner. So DTC was a perfect place for us because a lot of people don't want to go into stores and ask these questions. And then reviews. So for us, our key tech stack includes Shopify and some of its features. It's got collabs, which is great for smaller brands looking to do seeding and gifting with UGC providers. You've got their marketing flows that they can do, no problem. And they've got all those functionalities, in-house until you reach a certain point, and then the cost basis doesn't make sense so much. And then you can switch to other platforms. Reviews, we use Yotpo. Everybody, I think, in the industry knows Yotpo. They're very reliable. They interface very nicely. And then backend, ShipStation, which helps us connect to Flip or to Tailory or to different particular or 40 boxes or whoever we're working with as a retailer. So that is a really nice app as well to work with. But we keep it simple. And what we do is we use what Shopify has to offer until it either sunsets it, which that's just the way the tech world works. They're going to launch offering as much as they can for everybody to want to use it. And then they're going to sunset things as they can peel it off and parse it off to third-party apps that are going to do a better job, and it's going to cost them a lot less money, and you're not going to leave because you're already on Shopify. So we use what we can, and then as soon as they start sunsetting things, then we do that. So I think that's a really important part as well, is understanding the resources you have in terms of technology, what's available, what you can do in-house, what you should outsource so you don't muck it up. I don't want the website to go down or for it to look hideous, because nothing looks more amateurish than that. So I outsourced that piece, but the rest of the stuff we learned, we iterated, and then we brought it in-house.
Yeah, that's a great example. And it's one of the hardest things when you're starting a business to have the money that might be necessary. I always like the example of a logo, one of the very first things that you're going to want, but also extremely important to be professionally done, because you may live with it for forever, potentially.
Yep.
Certainly
Absolutely.
5-10 years, people do change their logo, but not that often. So yeah, when you need something professionally done and you're not a professional in that particular thing, then you might have to bring in some extra help for it.
Right. And then in terms of, and this is not to do with technology, but I think it's important. It's a lesson I learned that a lot of people have benefited from. It's a little bit specific, but trademarking. I worked with a big law firm and their IP partner at a big law firm. And they had run the background checks on our trademarks that we were going to launch with. We hadn't secured it before we launched. And they said, yeah, it's free and clear. There's nobody using it. We'll do the application. You kind of march in parallel. So either that or wait a year. And I didn't want to wait. So I said, all right, off we go. Well, it turns out they weren't right. So for trademarking, my recommendation, especially for smaller brands who don't already have a legal team or don't have legal experts they can rely on as it is to work with small trademarking firms. That's all that they do, because they did in about 2 minutes, they found the mark that was the one that we were intending on using and that we had somewhat soft launched with. We had to adapt very quickly. So I would say trademarking is also, if you don't have it wrapped up before you launch, I would err on the side of using small firms. That's all they do, because they know how to search the databases much better, as it turns out, than the larger firms. So that's another piece that sometimes people forget, but it's really important. So
yeah, it's very important. It's necessary too. When you do get into marketplaces like Amazon, as an example, it's part of that process that's needed. So if it's going to take a year,
yep. And that's why that's one of the reasons we weren't on Amazon. I mean, there were many reasons I've learned since then why we shouldn't be yet, but we'll get there eventually, hopefully. Yeah. So that's a really important piece.
All right. All good stuff. So as we wrap up, why don't you tell our listeners where they can find out more about you or find you and your products and everything you've got going on?
Sure. So our social handles are mecosmetics.com, just the word me, M-E. And then our social handle, that's our website. Social handles would be Me Cosmetics USA. Not that I'm particularly patriotic, I'm not even American, but I think it helps people understand where your brand is, where they're from. It tells them a lot right in the beginning. So that's where our social handles are. And we are primarily on Instagram. We do have a presence on TikTok. We don't post a lot there, but a lot of people post about us there. So that's a great place for discovery for folks. And then also our website, which is mecosmetics.com. And the Flip app, of course. And then we set up a code for any listeners. That's GETFOCAL, GETFOCAL, for 30% off your first order. So if anybody wants to place an order, and we have a no questions asked refund policy, so we make it pretty easy for people to try our product.
That's a fantastic deal. And who doesn't want more voluminous hair?
That's what I always say. In the beginning, our marketing was focused on hair loss. And now we said, forget that. We tossed that out the window. We said, yeah, that's a big part of what we do. But we just want people to have thicker looking hair. So, because who doesn't want thicker looking hair? And we're actually sending an email out. It's going out at 4 p.m. today, where the tagline says, because who doesn't want thicker looking hair?
And there's your addressable market, which is everyone on earth.
Exactly.
Every human being wants
Exactly.
more voluminous hair. Yeah. All right. Well, Camille, thanks so much for joining today. I think we'll wrap it up there. And thanks to everyone listening. And we will see you next time.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Focal Insights Podcast. If you like this episode, go ahead and hit the subscribe button so you can be alerted of new episodes. See you next time.